Colorado Territory, January 1871, the wind howled across the high plains like something wounded. And when Victor Ellison stepped into his barn that morning, rifle slung across his back, he was not expecting to find anyone alive inside. But then he heard a sound too soft to be the wind, too human to ignore, a baby's cry. He dropped the rifle against the wall and moved slowly toward the back stall. His boots crunched over straw and frozen dirt. When he pulled open the gate, his breath caught. A woman was huddled in the corner, shoulders curled protectively around a bundled infant. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hands raw and red, and her lips bluish with cold. She did not move until he stepped closer, and then her eyes snapped open bright and cautious, like a doe caught in a trap. "Do not hurt us," she said, voice hoarse. "Please." Victor held up both hands. "I will not. You are safe here." The baby whimpered again. The woman bent her head, pressing her cheek to the infant's brow. Her arms trembled. "You will freeze in here," Victor said quietly. "Come inside." "I got a fire going." She did not answer right away. Her jaw locked as if she was trying to hold herself together. "I mean it. Come on." He took off his coat, stepped forward, and draped it around her shoulders before she could flinch away. "You both need warmth." She stared at him for a second longer, then nodded once and shifted to her knees. The baby stirred in her arms but did not cry again. Victor helped her to her feet. She was lighter than she looked, like she had not eaten in days. Inside the cabin, the fire was low but steady. Victor threw on another split log and set a kettle on the hook. He cleared the nearest chair and helped her sit. She clutched the baby tighter, eyes scanning the room. "I am Victor," he said, keeping his voice low and even. "This is my place. You are welcome to stay." She watched him like she was waiting for the catch. After a long pause, she finally said, "Tessa Monroe." Victor nodded. "Tessa." He looked to the baby. "What is the little one called?" "Samuel," she said. "He is 3 months old." Victor crouched by the fire, stirring the embers. "How long have you been out there?" "Since yesterday morning. My wagon broke just north of here. I walked until I saw your barn. I was hoping no one would shoot us." "You were lucky," he said. "Some would have." She did not flinch at that. "I know." He brought her hot water and a thick blanket from the bed in the corner. When she peeled back the swaddling to check the baby, Victor saw the boy's cheeks were red from cold, his lips pale. But his eyes, like his mother's, held on with stubbornness. Victor fetched a clean rag and soaked it in warm water. "Mind if I help?" Tessa hesitated, then gave a single nod. Carefully, he dabbed at the baby's face while Tessa held him steady. The boy blinked up at Victor, quiet now. "You are good with him," she said softly. "I had a son," Victor said. "A long time ago." Tessa looked up, her eyes meeting his with something like understanding. She did not ask more, and he was grateful. They fed the baby together with what little milk Victor had on hand. Tessa drank hot water with honey, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warmth left in the world. "Where were you headed?" Victor asked once Samuel had dozed off. "South," she said. "I buried my husband 2 weeks ago in Cheyenne. He took sick on the trail and it took him fast. We were headed to New Mexico. I thought maybe I could find work there." Victor nodded slowly. "You have family?" "No one left." She looked down at the baby, "Just him." "I am sorry." She looked at the flames, her voice flat. "We had plans, a small farm, a quiet life." "Nothing big." Victor stirred the fire again. "Quiet sounds good." He had lived alone for 6 years now. Since the fever took his wife and boy in the same week, he had not let anyone close. He worked the land, traded in town when needed, and spoke little. The cold did not bother him anymore. Nothing did. But now, with this woman and her son under his roof, something old was stirring in his chest like coals catching flame. That night, he gave her the bed, and he took the floor by the fire. When he woke to Samuel crying, Tessa was already up, walking him gently around the room. She moved with a soft rhythm, murmuring to the child, her hair loose around her face. The firelight caught in it, a warm gold. Victor sat up, watching her for a moment before speaking. "You can stay as long as you need." She looked over at him, her eyes tired but grateful. "I mean it," he said. "No one else here for miles." Tessa nodded. "Thank you." They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Victor chopped wood, hunted small game, and kept the fire going. Tessa cleaned what she could, mended clothes, and nursed the baby. She never asked for more than what she needed, and never spoke of her husband again one morning. While Victor was outside splitting logs, he looked through the window and saw her laughing. Samuel had grabbed her nose with both hands and refused to let go. The sound of her laugh, light and sudden, hit him harder than he expected. He realized he had missed that sound, not just from someone else, from himself. That night after supper, they sat by the fire. Tessa rocked Samuel while Victor carved a bit of wood into a toy horse. He handed it to her without saying a word. She turned it in her fingers, smiled, and set it beside the cradle. "You are kind," she said. "I am not," he replied. I do not like seeing people freeze." She looked at him for a long time. "Still. You could have turned us away." He met her eyes. "I never would have." The fire cracked between them. Samuel stirred in his sleep. "You miss them," Tessa said quietly. He nodded. "Every day. I am sorry. I am too." She reached across the space between them and laid her hand over his. It was warm, small, and steady. "I do not know what comes next," she said. "Neither do I," Victor replied, but he did not pull his hand away. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt something thawing inside him, something good, something real. The snow held for 3 days. Wind dropped off, but the cold stayed sharp, settling into the bones of the land. Victor had lived through enough winters to know when to stay close to the hearth, and Tessa seemed to sense it, too. She didn't ask about travel or what lay beyond the tree line. She stayed near the fire, wrapped in quiet, with Samuel often curled against her chest. On the 4th morning, sun glinted off the snow crust, and Victor found her standing near the window, arms folded tight, her breath fogging the glass. "I can help mend the fence," she said without turning. "I saw it sagging near the east edge." Victor pulled on his coat. "Been meaning to fix it." "I've done fence work before," she said. "My pa had cattle in Dakota Territory. He made all 6 of us learn the work, girls too." Victor nodded. "I'll bring the tools." They stepped out together, Samuel bundled against her in a sling she'd stitched from an old flour sack. The air bit at their cheeks, but the sky was clean and high, and the stillness wasn't empty. It felt watchful, like the land itself was listening. The east fence ran along a thin stand of juniper where the snow drifted deep. Victor handed her the hammer while he held up the beam. Her swing was sure, though she winced once when the handle caught her blister. "You all right?" She shifted Samuel higher and kept hammering. "I'll manage." They worked in silence for a stretch. The rhythm of it, the thud of wood against wood, the rattle of nails in his palm, all of it settled something in him. Not comfort, exactly, but a steadiness he hadn't felt since before the sickness took hold of his home. When the last post was braced, Tessa stepped back and wiped her brow on her sleeve. "That'll hold for a while." Victor nodded. "You've got a good eye." "My husband wasn't much for tools," she said, adjusting Samuel's sling again. "He taught letters mostly, book smart. I think he liked that I knew how to run a fence line." Victor leaned against the post. "You miss him." She didn't answer at first. Then softly, "I miss what we thought we were building." They walked back slow, Samuel snoring against her chest. Overhead, a hawk cut a clean line across the sky. Victor let his stride match hers, not speaking, not needing to. When they reached the cabin, he pulled the door open and let her step in first. By evening, the wind picked up again. He cooked beans with salted pork while Tessa rocked Samuel in her lap, humming low, tuneless. Victor handed her a bowl and sat across from her, the fire throwing gold light against the walls. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said. "Supplies are running low." She looked up. "How far is it?" "Day's ride there and back if the trail's clear. I'll take the mule." Tessa looked at Samuel. "We'll be fine." Victor hesitated. "If you'd rather not be alone." Her gaze lifted. "I've weathered worse." "Still," he said, setting his bowl aside, "if you need anything, anything at all, write it down. I'll see what I can trade for." She nodded. "I'll make a list." The next morning, frost clung to the porch railings. Victor saddled the mule with care, packed flour, candles, and the last of his smoked meat. Tessa stood in the doorway, arms around Samuel, her shawl drawn tight. "I'll be back before dark," he said, mounting. She gave a small nod. "Ride safe." The trail to town cut through a shallow ravine, ice slick over the rocks. He took it slow, mule picking careful steps. The sky stayed clear, but clouds were building to the west, and he kept one eye on them as he rode. In town, he bartered pelts for oats, sugar, and dried apples. At the mercantile, he paused over a bolt of calico, the blue one with white flowers. He pictured it on Tessa, something light for spring. He didn't buy it, but he stood there longer than he meant to. The sun dipped low as he turned back toward the ridge. Snow began to fall again, fine and slow, but he pressed on. When he reached the cabin, smoke curled steady from the chimney. He tied off the mule and stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, then the scent of pine and something faintly sweet. Tessa was seated at the table, sewing a patch into one of his shirts. She looked up. "You made it." He set the bundles down. "Wasn't sure I'd beat the weather." She rose and took the sugar sack, setting it beside Samuel's cradle. He missed the quiet. Victor watched her a moment. "I saw a bolt of blue calico, thought of you." Her hands paused. "I always liked blue. I'll get it next time." Her voice was softer now. "You don't have to. I want to." She didn't speak for a long time, then she came to stand beside him. Her hand brushed his arm, not much, just enough to be felt. "I'm not used to someone thinking of me when they're away," she said. "I didn't expect to." She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Still, you did." Samuel stirred, drawing her away. She lifted him, kissed his brow, then turned back to Victor, the curve of her mouth quiet but sure. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The storm came down heavy that night, but inside, the fire stayed bright. The snow gave way to rain by mid-February, and with it came the scent of thawing earth. The pine needles outside gleamed wet and dark, and the cabin roof ticked steadily with runoff. Victor patched a leak near the window with boiled pitch while Tessa stood at the hearth, shelling dried beans into a wooden bowl, her sleeves rolled above the elbow. "You ever work cattle?" she asked, keeping her eyes on her hands. "Used to," Victor said, setting the tin of pitch aside. "Before I came here, I drifted south for a season, helped drive a herd up from Texas to Dodge." She nodded slowly. "My father did a run once when I was little. He came home with a cracked rib and a Spanish saddle." Victor leaned an elbow against the wall. "You speak any Spanish?" "Enough to trade. My husband was fluent. He spent time teaching along the Rio Grande before I met him." She paused, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "He wanted to start a school down there, said the land was dry but the people had heart." Victor watched her for a moment. "What did you want?" She set the bowl on the table. "I wanted to belong somewhere, not just pass through. I've lived in dugouts, tents, a sod house that crumbled in the rain. Never had four walls that stayed standing for long. You have them now." She glanced at him, then looked away. "I don't expect to keep them." Victor stepped forward, slow and steady. "Why not?" "Because nothing stays." "Not for me." Samuel stirred from his nap in the cradle, letting out a soft, breathy whine. Tessa moved to him, lifting him gently, cradling his head with practiced care. Victor picked up the bowl she'd left and poured the beans into the kettle, adding water from the bucket. The fire snapped as he swung the pot over it. "I used to believe that too," he said. Tessa sat with Samuel in her lap, rocking just enough to ease him. "What changed?" He turned the kettle hook. "I stopped looking backward." She didn't speak for a long time. Rain ticked harder against the roof, a steady rhythm. That night, after the baby slept, he found her sitting on the porch step, shawl drawn around her shoulders. The air was damp but not cold. The clouds had broken apart and a sliver of moonlight touched the wet earth. He stepped beside her. "You should be inside." "I needed the quiet," she said. "And the dark." He sat, Boothiel's scraping the wood. "You sleep at all?" She shook her head. "I keep hearing wagons in my dreams, axles breaking, wheels stuck in mud. I hear him coughing in the backboard. And I keep thinking if I just made him stop and rest earlier, maybe." Victor reached out, his hand settling over hers. "You did what you could." Her fingers tensed beneath his, then eased. "I didn't know how fast it would take him." "You couldn't have." She nodded, eyes fixed on the trees. "He was gentle. He read poetry out loud when the nights stretched long, never raised his voice. Even when we were soaked to the bone, he made it feel like adventure." Victor watched the curve of her profile, the way her brow furrowed just faintly. "You don't talk like a woman who's lost hope." "I'm not sure what I have left," she looked at him then. "But I know I'm not ready to be alone again. You're not." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, not uncertain, just honest. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next," she said. "You don't have to know," Victor said. "You just have to stay." She turned to face him fully now. "And if I did stay, I'd build a bigger bed," he said. "Fix the roof proper come spring. Maybe plant a second row of beans." Tessa's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the quiet weight of understanding. You'd share this place, he nodded, if you wanted it. She looked back toward the trees. I think I do. He didn't move, didn't pressure. He just let her sit with the thought, let it settle into her bones the way the warmth had crept into his over these weeks. Inside, Samuel stirred once, then quieted again. I've never known a man like you, she said softly. Victor looked at her, the damp shine of her eyes catching the moon's edge. I've never met a woman like you. She leaned against his shoulder, her head fitting just beneath his jaw. He wrapped one arm around her without a word. The rain let up sometime before midnight. The night held them, steady and close, two people no longer passing through but beginning to take root. By late March, the earth softened enough for Victor to turn soil beside the house. He worked the spade into the thawed ground, his shirt damp with sweat by mid-morning. Tessa came out carrying Samuel against her hip, a strip of linen tied across her shoulders to keep him close. She squinted up at the sun, then stepped barefoot into the dirt beside him. You planting a vegetable patch or digging a grave? Victor leaned on the spade, glancing at the uneven line he'd made. A man forgets how to measure straight when he's been planting alone too long. She studied the furrow, then pointed. You're overworking the edge, it'll flood when the rains come. He narrowed his eyes toward the slope. You're right. I can mark the rows if you've got string, she said. And you'll want to plant the beans close to the wall. They'll climb better with some shelter. Victor nodded, brushing soil from his hands. There's twine in the shed, I'll fetch it. Inside the lean-to, he found the twine coiled beside a rusted bit of harness. When he came back, Tessa had laid Samuel on a quilt just inside the shade and was kneeling beside the furrow, sleeves rolled again, fingers sifting through the soil like she was reading it. He handed her the twine. You learn all this growing up. My mother kept a garden, she said. Even when we moved every year, she said it was the only way to know what month you were in. Victor took the string and helped her measure out the rows. Their shadows stretched wide as the sun climbed higher, and the scent of damp earth clung to their clothes. Samuel fussed once, then fell back to sleep with one hand curled beside his cheek. When the rows were set, Victor stood back, wiping his brow. What else would you plant if you could? She looked at the neat lines they'd made. Carrots, maybe parsnips if the ground's deep enough. And chamomile for the baby's colic, Victor nodded. We'll plant it. They broke for supper when the light softened. Inside, the hearth fire was low, and the bread Tessa had made earlier still held its heat wrapped in a cloth. As they ate, she glanced toward the window. There's something I've been meaning to ask. Victor set his cup down. Go ahead. That second room, she said, the one off the back wall, you never use it. He nodded once. It was meant for my son. We built it when we thought he'd grow into it. She waited, but he didn't go on. I thought about moving Samuel in there, she said quietly. Not yet, but when he's older. Victor looked up. It's a good room for a child. I'd hang a curtain across the door, she said. Keep the light from waking him. He gave a small nod. You wouldn't need to ask. I didn't want to take something that still hurts to look at. Victor turned his cup in his hands. It used to, but not now. She reached across the table, her palm brushing the back of his hand. The gesture was quiet but settled. After the meal, they stepped outside with Samuel wrapped against her chest. The evening air held traces of warmth, and somewhere beyond the trees, a lark called out. Victor leaned against the rail while she stood beside him, watching the last light settle over the field. There's a traveling preacher due through town next month, she said. He raised a brow. I heard it from the man at the mercantile, she added. He's coming up from Trinidad, says he'll perform blessings and weddings if folks ask. Victor didn't speak right away. He watched Samuel's sleeping face, the way his breath moved soft and steady against Tessa's ribs. You thinking of something? He asked. Her voice was steady. I'm thinking I never got to marry in a church. We said our vows in a tent with a fence post for a cross. It was enough. But I always wondered what it would feel like to have something that didn't blow away in the wind. Victor turned to face her. Would you want that? She looked at him, the last of the sunlight catching in her eyes. Only if it meant staying. I'd like you to stay, he said. She didn't answer, but she laid Samuel in his arms and stepped into him until her forehead rested against his collar. He held them both firm and easy. The earth behind them was ready for seed, the roof above them patched against rain. And in the stillness, a future began to settle, one not borrowed, not imagined, but real, and waiting. The preacher came through in the second week of April, riding a sway-backed gelding and carrying a canvas satchel that rattled faintly with spoons and tin cups. By then, the cottonwoods had budded gold along the creek, and the field rows behind the cabin were showing their first green. Tessa met Victor's eyes when they saw the rider crest the ridge, and he nodded without needing to say a word. They waited until Samuel's morning sleep settled deep, then wrapped him in a quilt and laid him in the cradle near the hearth. Victor left the door cracked so they'd hear him if he stirred, and they walked hand in hand to the stand of junipers behind the barn, where the preacher had tethered his horse for shade. He was a quiet man with a face weathered deep from travel, and he didn't ask many questions. He looked at Victor, then at Tessa, and said simply, "You come of your own choosing." Tessa's hand tightened around Victor's. "I do, and you?" the preacher asked. "I do," Victor said. The vows came soft and plain. Tessa wore a dress she had sewn from scrap muslin and a ribbon she'd dyed with boiled lilac. Victor had washed and trimmed his hair that morning, combed it back until it lay flat, and polished his boots even though the dust clung again by the time they crossed the yard. They exchanged no rings. The preacher laid a hand on Victor's shoulder and said a quiet prayer, then nodded once and left them there beneath the trees. Tessa turned toward him, her eyes full but steady. "I feel like I've stepped onto something solid." Victor touched her face, brushing a strand of hair back. "So have I." They walked back slow, the light between the branches dappling over their joined hands. Samuel had stirred by the time they returned, his small voice rising in a steady, hungry cry. Tessa moved to him quickly, lifting him with practiced ease, and Victor bent to stoke the fire. They didn't speak much that afternoon. They didn't need to. By dusk, the preacher was gone. A thin trail of dust marked where his horse had passed through the eastern trees, and then the quiet returned. Later, after supper, Victor stepped out to the porch with a plate in hand. He'd carved a wedge of cornbread and spread it with blackberry preserves from the jar Tessa had brought back from town the week before. She followed with a blanket and the baby cradled against her chest. "I thought we could sit a while," she said. Victor took the blanket and draped it over her legs once she'd settled beside him. "I was hoping you'd say that." The stars crept out slow, one by one, until the sky held them like scattered wheat. The baby slept easily, his head turned against Tessa's collarbone, one hand curled beneath his chin. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Victor rested his arm along the back rail. "I think about building a second shed, keeping a few chickens, maybe teaching Samuel to fish when he's old enough to hold a line." She leaned into him. "I'd like to have a second child if the Lord allows." Victor looked down at her, then at the baby resting safe between them. "So would I." Tessa smiled, slow and quiet. "It's a fine place to raise a family," he nodded. "It is now." As the night deepened, they stayed there, wrapped in each other and the sound of wind moving low through the trees. In the months that followed, the field rows thickened with beans and summer squash. Tessa grew sunflowers along the side wall, their heavy heads nodding toward the sun each morning. Victor repaired the shed and built a chicken coop from cedar planks he'd traded for in town. The cabin grew fuller not just with things, but with the rhythm of a life built shoulder to shoulder. By late summer, Tessa was carrying again. She told him one morning as he was chopping kindling behind the barn, her hand resting just beneath her ribs. He dropped the axe and wrapped her in both arms, holding her until the sun climbed high and warm above the ridge. They made a cradle together from pine, Victor carving the rails while Tessa stitched the lining from a bolt of soft cotton. Samuel took his first steps that fall, tottering toward the hearth with both hands outstretched. Tessa knelt to catch him, and Victor saw in her eyes the same quiet strength that had brought her through wind and snow, sorrow and want. That winter, the snows came early and deep, but the cabin held strong. Inside, the fire never went out. Victor read aloud from the family Bible some nights, his voice low and steady. Tessa quilted by lantern light, her needle rising and falling with the rhythm of the baby's breath inside her. In spring, their daughter was born just after sunrise, her hair dark and thick, her lungs strong. They named her Clara. Victor held her with hands that no longer shook when life pressed close. Tessa rested beside him, her eyes closed, a smile faint but sure on her lips. Years passed, but the rhythm held. The children grew. The fence lines stretched farther. Flowers bloomed along the porch rail each spring, and the door never stayed closed long in summer. And through it all, Victor and Tessa never stopped reaching for each other in the hush before dawn, in the quiet after the fields were turned, in the long hush between storms. They had built something not from escape, but from choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing to love without condition or rush, and they kept choosing every day.